What sounds like a crazy conspiracy theory, but is actually true and proven. The United States in World War II created a bomb. The United States government used hallucinogenic drugs and hypnosis in a mind control experiment. The CIA pumped narcotics into test subjects to make them susceptible to confessions. Many of them completely unwilling. They did it for over 20 years and several people died as a result of the experiments. MKUltra, Operation Northwoods. The Joint Chiefs of Staff drew up and approved plans to create terrorist acts on US soil to drum up support for a war and invasion of Cuba in the 1960s. President Kennedy rejected the plan, which included innocent Americans being shot dead on the streets, boats carrying refugees fleeing Cuba to be sunk on the high seas, a wave of violent terrorism to be launched in Washington, D.C., Miami, and elsewhere. People being framed for bombings they did not commit. And planes being hijacked. To the government. We are farm animals to be controlled. I know it's a democracy, but if they want public opinion to be something, they will do whatever it takes. The people as a whole in a democracy never make decisions based on critical evidence or thinking. Most all of public opinion is emotionally reactionary and is the emotion the media wants us to have. The Greenbrier Bunker. People love conspiracies about huge underground complexes built for the rich and famous to survive nuclear fallouts. Think Denver Airport. And that's exactly what Greenbrier is. The bunker was built under the Greenbrier Resort for Congress people to escape to. And was kept a secret for 30 years. Even though people suspected, why is there a 7,000 foot airstrip for a town of 3,000 people? For the entire time it was functional. Every congressperson was assigned a bunk. These days you can take tours. And I'm sure we'll hear about the next bunker once it's defunct. The US controlled several elections and overthrew governments in South America and Central America to avoid countries following Cuba's example. Operation Snow White. GEODA. This actually exists. In the 1960s, Canada hired a professor by the name of Frank Robert Wake to develop a machine called the Fruit Machine. The Fruit Machine was supposed to identify GY men so they could then be run out of the Canadian government. The Fruit Machine wasn't literally a machine. It was a system of tests for determining if someone was GY. The fear was that the GY men could be blackmailed by the Soviets for being GY. And thus endanger the government, i.e. typical Cold War bullshit. The actual system was pretty laughable. It involved testing word associations. The researchers considered some words G-er than others. Somehow, measuring the time men's eyes rested on a picture of a man versus that of a woman. And a whole bunch of other things that I can't remember at the moment. In the end, it was a huge waste of time that concluded nothing at all. Except that the RCMP are a joke. And was highly unethical given that the GY men used for the study were not informed of the purpose of the testing. In the 80s and 90s, Western politicians would constantly stir up satanic panic and things like teenage cultists running underground pedophile rings, using pop culture as a scapegoat. Well, pedophile rings were definitely going on, but a different group of people. The idea that the elite are pedophiles has been around in Britain for decades. It gets spookier the further you look into it. It seems like most major governments on Earth refuse to delve too deep into investigations out of fear of who will be discovered. Agent Orange. The U.S. military sprayed millions of gallons of Agent Orange and other herbicides on trees and veg. The CIA can watch through your cameras, hear your phone calls, etc. A few years ago, anyone that told you they're watching us sounded absolutely crazy. Now it's proven. The reason very few are upset about this though is that many people don't find themselves interesting enough to be secretly watched by the government. Especially since the NSA will never text someone so and be like, hey, your person is cheating on you. If that happened, people would lose their shit. Or, hey Becca, stop talking about Christina behind her back or we will tell her. Double quote. Read up on the current impeachment of South Korea's president. You couldn't write a better script for a conspiracy movie. In case you didn't know, a cult of shamanistic women have been running the South Korean government behind the scenes and have been funneling and laundering money from the government, Samsung, other large companies to their cult. The reason they are able to run it from behind the scenes is because they promised the now impeached president that they would be able to talk to her dead dad for her and relay messages to her. I'll start it off with, there is estrogen in the tap water. The US sold and dealt crack cocaine to oppress black people. http://com/172hveo. PNG Nixon's aide said this in '94. And that a lot of the tough on crime war on drugs laws in the 1980s were meant to do the same. It's no coincidence that out of the major ethnicities, black people make up the lowest percent of the US population but the highest percent of inmates. Especially when it comes to non-violent crimes. And prison labor is used heavily, but prisoners receive next to no pay, so are basically slaves. Combine that with high recidivism rates due to prison not being geared towards rehabilitation and the fact that ex-cons can't f***ing vote. It really seems like the system targets them for suppression even in the modern day. Iran-Contra. America overthrew the governments of some South American countries because they wanted to help Chiquita keep its cheap bananas. Yes. America overthrew governments and caused tens of thousands of deaths because a banana company wanted to keep exploiting said countries for cheap bananas. Shitloads of FK'd up the did. Infected people with STDs. Fake vaccination programs. etc. During the Troubles in Northern Ireland, British military intelligence broke into some empty IRA safe houses, used goat's blood to paint pentagrams on the floors, left a few satanic Bibles, black candles, and upside down crucifixes lying around, before telling the police where the safe house was. The idea was that when the police raided the safe house, they'd see all the satanic paraphernalia, which would start rumors that the IRA worshipped the devil. It must be fun working in Psych Ops. George Bush SR's father was involved in a plot to assassinate FDR. He and the fellow conspirators, who were mostly bankers and businessmen, were turned in by Smedley Butler, a retired Major General of the Marines. No one was ever prosecuted and the media at the time treated it as a giant hoax. There is some debate as to how close the plan actually was to execution, literally, but there is no longer any doubt that the topic was discussed at least several times as a group. In apparent sincerity. Vertical bar. Oh yeah. And Bush's father also took money directly from the Nazis to help out his bank. Bacteria mutate faster in space. One of the problems long-term space travel has to overcome is the rapid occurrence of antibiotic-resistant superbugs in zero gravity. We don't know exactly why yet though. The Mafia. The secret crime society was virtually unknown until the 1960s, when member Joe Valachi first revealed the society's secrets to law enforcement officials. They knew that organized crime existed, but did not know to what extent. Their control included working with the CIA, politicians and the biggest businesses in the world. Operation Sea Spray. In 1926, the US government, frustrated that its crackdown on alcohol was ineffective, decided to start poisoning industrial alcohols. Bootleggers often stole or made backroom deals to purchase large quantities of ethanol, then would add flavoring and repackage as drinkable spirits. All told, the US government killed around 10,000 US citizens through this program. http://www.slate.com articles Health and Science Medical Examiner /2010/02/The Chemist's Law. HTML. The diamonds are super common. De Beers just holds all of them in gigantic storage units and releases a small amount of them at a time to keep their value up. Also we can f***ing make them and the ones we make are completely flawless and superior to natural ones in every way. Yet we are told they are less valuable because marketing. The Lost Cosmonauts. The gist of the theory is that Yuri Gagarin wasn't the first person in outer space. The previous attempts failed, and so the Soviets covered it up. This theory isn't 100% proven, but the evidence is definitely compelling. The creepiest is the Torbert recordings, which appears to contain radio transmissions from failed missions. JFK bears nearly single-handed responsibility for the Cuban Missile Crisis. According to the elementary school version of the story, the evil Soviets started putting missiles in Cuba, forcing the USA to take a heroic stand in defense of democracy everywhere. The reality is that the Soviet missiles were a reaction to several years of economic and other warfare against Cuba. Following the Bay of Pigs fiasco, JFK ordered a secret campaign of economic sabotage on Cuba, including biological warfare, http NACLA, org news 2016-12-16 cost covert operations Cuba, and terrorist bombings. Operation Paperclip. After the fall of Germany in World War I, many Nazi scientists were taken by Russia and the US. The one specific name I remember off the top of my head is Wernher von Braun. He was head of NASA and straight up Nazi that would hang the 5 slowest Jews of the day for motivation to work harder. Wernher von Braun, architect of the V2, later architect of several rocket designs culminating in the Saturn, was head of NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center. He later became head of their strategic planning. He was instrumental in drumming up public support for the space program, going so far as to subvert the politics by going on TV and talking direct to the people. Not just about space missions but about the potential for a Soviet space race. Of course, around the same time nuclear arms were being developed and tested. ICBMs were developed alongside the space program, the V2 being a prototype of what we now call ICBMs. I can't speak to his involvement with the Nazi war effort, but he genuinely seemed to have a real passion for space. Citing his initial "wow, we could actually get into space" realization as having come from seeing the V2 in action. Conspiracies are common practice. When you were a kid you probably at one point conspired against other kids. I don't think anything sounds crazy and is worth a look into. I would say the Franklin scandal, http www.franklincase.org, which also ties into the global human trafficking ring we are seeing exposed today due to certain leaked information which includes satanic ritual abuse. I personally knew someone who was groomed to be a boy prostitute for very rich and powerful people, including high-ranking government officials and popular actors. Not all of them, mind you. In fact, he died in L.A. 10 years ago from IV drug use. Still a high-class male prostitute as an adult. Very sad. The Tuskegee syphilis experiment. African American men were told they were receiving free medical care when in fact the Department of Public Services were examining the progression of syphilis in those African American males. Penicillin had proven to be an effective cure at the time, yet to continue the experiment they sacrificed the health of those men. This shit literally went on for 40 years from 1932 to 1972, so really in recent memory. SMH. Sounds like a crazy conspiracy theory, but this story is 100% fact. Actually sounds more like something from a horror movie. A substance known as starlight was created by an amateur chemist who stumbled upon a formula of hairdresser chemicals that somehow would create a very good heat-resistant material. Like, you can cover a thin coat on an egg, heat the substance with a butane torch, and the egg itself can still be picked up with a bare hand and crack it with the yolk still in room temperature. When he made demonstration videos, obviously some government agencies including NASA showed great interest in this substance. Imagine thinly coating a spacecraft with this. It would be a much lighter heat shield than ceramic and deflect more heat. Or even for a structure to withstand heat damage from bombs. However, the inventor was thinking a bit ahead, but ultimately caused his invention to go nowhere. He allowed major organizations to make tests on his samples but didn't want them to reverse engineer it. It is probable he was also afraid to see it being weaponized. For example, to create very tough military armor. He wanted to keep 51% ownership, but nobody took his deal. Instead he took his idea to his grave. Operation Wandering Soul is a good example of an army using the opposing side's culture religion against them. During the Vietnam War, US engineers created recordings of eerie sounds and altered voices which were then played from recording devices in the field or via helicopters around enemy positions. The playing of the recordings were meant to play off the Vietnamese soldiers' belief of the wandering soul, which is a result of deceased soldiers not being buried properly, causing their soul to wander aimlessly in pain and suffering. It was believed that if the ghostly recordings were played, it would scare the Vietnamese soldiers into leaving their positions. Carrots help you see in the dark. Kinda. During World War II the Allies were experimenting with radar, and so we're having above average luck at spotting the enemy in the dark. We also had a shortage of many imported foods, but a surplus of carrots which grow brilliantly in the UK. And carrots contain vitamin D, which is helpful for the eyes. So it sounds legit. Bring these all together and you have nation scale propaganda to get more carrots eaten, to hide the top secret stuff, and to, hopefully, bamboozle the enemy. F-king genius. Aliens exist. Vladimir Putin actually confirmed this. Plus you can read all the classified documents from the US government that they have recently unclassified on UFOs and aliens. Give it a read sometime. It's incredibly interesting and also scary. If you're too lazy to read or don't know how, lol, check out the show Unsealed Alien Files on Netflix. It's a show based on all the documents recently unclassified.